They started cutting my trees before the sun was even up. No knock, no warning. Just the sound of chainsaws ripping through the cold morning fog. The sound, rah, rah, ma, crack, echoed across the hillside behind my house, like someone was deliberately destroying something that had stood longer than most people's memories. I shot up out of bed when the clock read 5:45 in the morning. I didn't even need to look to know something was wrong. That kind of sound never brings anything good. I threw on a flannel jacket, slipped into my boots without tying them, and rushed out the back door. The Montana cold hit my face sharp as a blade. A thin layer of fog covered the ground, but it wasn't enough to hide what was in front of me. 3 old cottonwood trees were already down, clean cuts, sap still bleeding. The exposed rings were pale, raw, like fresh open wounds, and standing in the middle of it all was a woman. She wore a dark gray blazer, collar stiff, hair pulled back tight, a clipboard in her hand. Her posture straight, unwavering, not a trace of hesitation, not a hint of confusion. I walked straight toward her, my voice still thick from the cold and the anger. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" She turned to me, her expression calm to the point of irritation. No apology, no surprise, just a measured look, like I was the one who had stepped into her space. "We are clearing this area under HOA regulations," she said evenly. "This section is no longer under your control." 1 second of silence. I looked at her, then at the stumps, then back at her. "No longer under my control?" I repeated slowly. "That's correct," she replied, without emphasis, without explanation. "If you have any concerns, you can contact our attorney." That was the first time I met Patricia Vaughn, and it was also the moment she made the biggest mistake of her life. My name is Daniel Harper, 56 years old. I am not a lawyer, not a politician, and not the kind of man who goes looking for trouble. I am a retired civil engineer, living quietly on the land my father left me on the edge of this small town for over 10 years. I know land, I understand water. I have spent my entire life reading terrain the way other people read maps. But in Patricia's eyes, I was just an old man living alone, owning a piece of land next to a newly built subdivision. Someone she thought could be pushed aside with a few HOA letters. If you have ever read HOA stories or Karen stories online, you would recognize someone like her immediately. No shouting, no anger. They are dangerous because they truly believe they are always right, and that the system behind them will protect them. Behind her, the workers kept moving, one handling the saw, one measuring, one writing things down. No one looked at me, no one asked. I stepped forward again, stopping right at the edge where the trees had just been cut. It was not just trees, it was a boundary, something that had stood there long before Silver Creek Estates even existed. "Stop," I said, clearer this time. No one stopped. I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera. My voice went cold. "I am recording. This is private property. I have never signed anything allowing the HOA to operate here. I am asking you to stop immediately." That was when Patricia tilted her head slightly, not out of concern, but because she realized I was not reacting like everyone else. "You are misunderstanding the situation," she said. "This area has been adjusted under the latest HOA update. You no longer have rights here." There it was again. No longer have rights. I took a slow breath. The smell of fresh wood, engine oil, and the biting cold mixed together, sharpening my thoughts. She didn't know. She didn't know what she had just touched. She didn't know what those trees were standing in front of. She didn't know that behind that tree line was not just land, but a branch of a river. And the thing she thought she could take with a few HOA papers was written clearly in a document from nearly 50 years ago. A document I had only recently read again. I looked straight at Patricia, my voice lower now, slower. "Are you absolutely sure about that?" She didn't answer right away. Just looked at me. Measuring. Calculating. Then, she turned away, signaling the crew to keep going. The chainsaw roared again, but this time, I didn't hear it as destruction. I heard it as a mistake. A mistake they were going to pay for. And not a small one. My father once turned down a check worth over $1 million just to keep this land. And now, a woman with a clipboard thinks she can take it with a few lines of HOA regulations. I stood there, looking at the tree stumps still bleeding sap, and for the first time that morning, I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. What I felt was clearer, sharper, like when you look at a structure that is about to collapse and you know exactly where its weak point is. This land is not just where I live. It was passed down through 2 generations, every layer of soil carrying the weight of decisions that were carefully made. My father bought it in 1974. Back then, it was nothing but raw land, no paved roads, no electricity, no comfort of any kind. People said he was crazy for putting money into a place no one wanted. But my father didn't buy land to sell it later. He bought it to keep it. I still remember the day a real estate development company came to see him, about 12 years ago. They brought plans, designs, promises of a modern neighborhood. They talked about value, about the future, about how this place would become the center. They gave him a number. $1,200,000. My father just looked at them, then looked out toward the back of the house, where the tree line ran along the gentle slope leading down to the water. "You don't understand," he said. "I'm not selling this." They truly didn't understand. And maybe Patricia Vaughn didn't either. After the crew left that morning, I didn't call the police right away. I didn't make a scene. I went back inside, made a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, looking out through the large glass window toward the back. The fog had started to lift. Weak sunlight slipped through the empty spaces where the 3 trees used to stand. That empty space wasn't just loss. It was a sign. I know HOAs. I've seen enough HOA stories to understand how they operate. They don't do anything randomly. Everything has a purpose. The question is, what was Patricia's purpose? That afternoon, I walked along the property line, slowly, carefully, missing nothing. I brought a slope meter, a small notebook, and the habit of someone who reads land the way others read technical reports. On the other side of the fence was Silver Creek Estates. 280 houses so identical you could close your eyes and still know where you were. Grass trimmed evenly, white fences, everything neat, perfect, and artificial. I stopped where they had cut the trees that morning, and then I saw it. The ground on their side of the fence no longer sloped the way it used to. It had been adjusted, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. But to me, it stood out like a fresh cut. The water, it was changing direction. I knelt down, brushing away a thin layer of soil near the base of the fence. My fingers touched something hard, smooth. A PVC pipe, not large, not obvious, but placed at a very precise angle, pointing straight toward my land. My heartbeat slowed, not from surprise, but because everything was starting to come together. They didn't just want the trees gone. They wanted the water to move. I stood up, looking along the slope. If you understand how water flows, you understand this immediately. Change the grade just a little, add a few directional points, and you can shift an entire drainage system. And if the water started flowing onto my land, what would happen? I turned and looked back, toward where the trees had once stood. Behind them was the water, not large, not loud, but constant, steady. And most importantly, it didn't originate from my land. It came from uphill. From Silver Creek Estates itself. A thought flashed through my mind. If they were having drainage problems, if they needed somewhere to push excess water, then my land, with an existing water flow, would become the perfect solution, as long as they could control it. I let out a quiet laugh. Not happy, not angry, just the kind of reaction you have when you realize just how much someone underestimated you. Patricia thought I was just an old man living on an outdated piece of land. She didn't know I had spent over 30 years designing drainage systems for projects far bigger than that subdivision. She didn't know I could look at a slope and read the intention behind it. And most importantly, she didn't know that what she was trying to manipulate wasn't just land. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every angle, every detail. Tire tracks, disturbed soil, every inch of that PVC pipe. Each photo was a piece of the puzzle, and I was starting to see the whole picture. As the sun set, I stood at the edge of the property, watching the water flow quietly past. The last light of the day reflected on the surface, shimmering as if nothing had changed. But I knew, beneath that calm surface, a fight had already begun. And this time, I wasn't the one being pushed into a corner. That woman never raised her voice. But one email from her at 11:30 at night, and the entire neighborhood would go quiet the next morning. Patricia Vaughn was not the kind of Karen you see in loud videos online. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Her power came from cold control. I started looking into her that same night, not by asking directly. People like Patricia don't reveal weaknesses when questioned. But communities are different, and communities always talk, just not directly. A neighbor on the other side of the fence, named Walter, was the first to speak. He was in his 70s, had lived in Silver Creek Estates since the early days. "So, you met Vaughn," he said, his tone, not a question, but a statement. I nodded. Walter sighed, looking back toward the row of identical houses behind him. "She's not like those Karens you see in Reddit stories," he said. "She's worse." I said nothing, just waited. "She used to manage apartment complexes in the city," Walter continued. 20 years, turned rundown places into money machines. Then she retired, moved here. Took her less than 2 years to become HOA president. Fast. Too fast. People like that don't rise by luck. "They voted for her?" I asked. Walter gave a dry laugh. "They didn't understand what they were voting for." I looked at him. "She doesn't break rules," he said. "She uses them. Reads every fine line, every clause no one pays attention to, then turns it into a weapon." A light breeze passed through, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass. Everything still looked perfect. But beneath that perfection was something else. Walter told me about the small things. A man fined for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of gray. A veteran denied permission to install a flagpole because it was a few inches too tall. A widow receiving a warning letter for leaving a garden hose on her porch. Nothing major, but enough for everyone to understand one thing: do not go against Patricia Vaughn. "Then why doesn't anyone push back?" I asked. Walter looked at me for a long moment. "You already know the answer," he said. And I did. It wasn't because they agreed. It was because they didn't have the time, the money, or the knowledge to fight the system. HOAs exist because of that gap. The gap between those who understand the rules and those who don't. And Patricia Vaughn lived in that gap. I went back home after dark, but my mind didn't stop. What I had seen on the land, what I had heard from Walter, it was all coming together into a clearer picture. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a plan, and that plan had started long before the chainsaw touched the first tree. The next morning, I received a letter, a white envelope, HOA logo in the corner, clean, precise, just like everything Patricia did. I opened it and read every line. Notice of violation, unmanaged vegetation, impact on community drainage, 30 days to comply. If not, the HOA would take action and charge me. I finished reading and set the paper down on the table. No surprise, just confirmation. They were creating a reason, not to fix a problem, but to justify what they had already planned to do. I picked the letter back up, reading more carefully. The regulation they cited didn't apply to private land like mine. It applied only to shared areas. Wrong, clearly wrong, but written with enough confidence to make the reader doubt themselves. I had seen this before, not just in HOA stories, but in large-scale projects. When one side wants to pressure the other into compliance, they don't need to be completely right. They just need you to think they might be. I didn't respond, didn't call, didn't write back. I folded the letter, placed it into a yellow file folder, and put it in a drawer. Part of me already knew that wouldn't be the last letter. And it wasn't. 3 months later, the second one arrived. This time, it was different. A law firm's name was added. The tone was sharper, and there was a new detail. They claimed that the trees on my land were obstructing the natural flow of water into the HOA retention pond, and that I could be held responsible for damages if flooding occurred. I read that part and stopped, not because I was worried, but because I realized they had just changed the story from a minor violation to a legal risk. This was no longer a warning. This was preparation for something bigger. I stood up, walked to the back door, and looked out toward the property line. The wind moved lightly. The ground was still, but I knew someone had already started digging. Not with machines, with a plan. And Patricia Vaughn was right at the center of it. I didn't respond to the second letter. But I didn't ignore it either. 3 days after receiving it, I went back to the property line. This time, I brought more than just a notebook and my phone. I brought elevation tools, a laser measure, and something Patricia Vaughn probably never considered when she looked at me that morning. Experience. Not the kind you get from reading a few HOA rules. The kind built over 30 years working with land, water, and systems where a small mistake can cost an entire area. I moved slowly, very slowly, step by step, looking, measuring, recording. Land doesn't lie. You just have to know how to read it. And what I was reading wasn't normal. The slope on the Silver Creek estate side had changed more than I first thought. Not just a small section near the fence. A long stretch of ground had been adjusted, carefully. Subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, but enough to make the water change direction. I stopped, set my tools down, and followed the natural flow with my eyes. If there was heavy rain, the water wouldn't flow into their retention pond anymore. It would flow toward me. I stood up and looked around. No signs, no notices, no indication that they had permission to do this. Just the result. And that result couldn't be an accident. I walked further along the fence, a few dozen feet. At a lower point, where the soil was softer, I saw tire tracks. Narrow, deep. From a small machine, probably a skid steer. The tracks were fresh. I knelt down, touched the soil, still damp from recent disturbance. They had done this within no more than 2 months. Fast, quiet, precise. I took out my phone and photographed everything. Every angle. No detail missed. Each image tagged with location and time. I wasn't doing it out of anger. I was doing it because I knew this would matter later. When I stood up, I noticed a man standing on the other side of the fence, around 50, wearing a heavy jacket, hands in his pockets. He watched me for a moment, then spoke quietly. "They said you're the problem." I turned to him. "What did they say?" "That water from your land is overloading their system," he said. "That if it's not fixed, there will be flooding." I looked at him for a few seconds. He didn't seem hostile, just uncertain, like a lot of people in that neighborhood. "What's your name?" I asked. "Mark." "I'm Daniel." He nodded. "Do you believe them?" I asked. Mark didn't answer right away. He looked down at the ground, then back toward the houses behind him. "I don't know," he said, "but they have lawyers." A simple sentence. But it said everything. It's not truth that makes people believe. It's the fear of being wrong. I turned back toward my land. "If water is coming from my property," I said slowly, "then why would I install pipes to push it over here?" Mark frowned. "Pipes?" I pointed down at the PVC pipe. He bent down, looked closer, then stood back up. His expression changed, no longer confusion. Now, doubt. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. A seed of doubt had been planted. And in communities like this, doubt spreads fast. After Mark walked away, I continued surveying for nearly another hour. By the time the sun started dropping, I had enough. Not enough to win, but enough to understand. They didn't just send letters. They didn't just threaten. They had acted, and they thought I wouldn't notice. That night, I sat in my father's old office. The room was still exactly the way he left it. the smell of aged wood, paper, and something familiar I couldn't quite name. I laid the photos out on the desk, opened my notebook, reviewed every note. Then I pulled out the second letter again. This time, I didn't read it as someone receiving a notice. I read it as someone analyzing a plan. Every sentence, every word. They were trying to build a story. A story where I was the cause. But in reality, they were the ones changing the flow. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. If this were just a small dispute, they wouldn't have needed to complicate it this much. If this were just about trees, they wouldn't have reshaped the land. No, there was something bigger, and I was starting to see its outline. An insufficient drainage system, a new subdivision, an HOA that needed a solution, but didn't want to pay for it, and a neighboring piece of land with an existing water flow. I let out a quiet laugh, not amused, just the reaction you have when you realize you've been written into someone else's plan. But there was one thing Patricia Vaughn didn't know. I am not someone who gets written into a plan. And once I see it, I don't let it continue. I closed the notebook. Tomorrow, I would respond, not with words, but with the one thing Patricia understood best: evidence and the law. They didn't just install a pipe. They installed an entire system and thought no one would notice. The next morning, I called someone I trusted more than any map. Not a lawyer, not an official, someone who had spent his entire life surveying land in this area. His name was Leonard Briggs, 63 years old, 35 years as a surveyor. He didn't talk much. But whenever he said, "There's a problem," there was always a problem. Leonard arrived around 9 in the morning. Clear sky, light wind. A perfect day, if nothing had been wrong. He stepped out of his old pickup truck, wearing a baseball cap, scanning the area without saying a word. I showed him the photos I had taken. He looked at each one, no rush, no comments. Then he closed the phone and looked toward the property line. "Let's go," he said. We walked along the fence together. Leonard didn't carry much equipment, just a measuring rod, a handheld GPS, and eyes trained to see what others miss. He stopped at the PVC pipe, bent down, looked closely, brushed away the dirt around it. Then he stood up. "Someone did this on purpose," he said. His voice was calm, but I understood. "How long ago?" I asked. Leonard looked around, studying the soil, the compaction, the tire marks. "Not more than 2 months," he said. "Maybe less." He took a few more steps, stopped at a higher point, and looked down. "I want to remeasure the slope," he said. It took us nearly 2 hours to finish. Leonard recorded everything carefully. Every number, every angle, nothing was missed. When he finally stood up, he took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "Daniel," he said, this time looking directly at me, "they changed the direction of the flow." Not a suspicion, a conclusion. "How much?" I asked. He showed me the screen of his device. "About a 15-degree deviation from the natural direction," he said. "Enough to redirect water from their side to yours during heavy rain." I nodded slowly. "And that pipe?" I asked. Leonard glanced back. "Not the only one," he said. I turned sharply. "What?" He walked a few more feet along the fence, then stopped. He tapped the ground lightly with his rod. The sound was different, more hollow. He crouched down, scraping away a thin layer of soil. Another section of pipe appeared, older, partially buried in mud. My chest tightened. "This one isn't new," Leonard said. "At least a few years." I looked down at the pipe, then up toward the neighborhood. Not just once, not just recently. They had been doing this for a long time. Leonard stood up, brushing off his hands. "You're not the first person they've tried this on," he said. That sentence hit hard. Not the first. What did that mean? "What do you think they're doing?" I asked. Leonard didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the distance, where identical rooftops stretched across the horizon. "They have a drainage problem," he said finally. "And instead of fixing it the right way, they're looking for somewhere to push it." I let out a quiet laugh. Not amused, And I'm that place. Leonard didn't deny it. Do you know what this means? He asked. I looked at him. This isn't just a land dispute, he said. This is altering natural water flow. If it causes damage, they could be sued hard. I stayed silent for a few seconds. In my mind, everything started moving faster. No longer scattered pieces, but a complete system. They reshaped the land. They installed pipes. They created a new flow. Then they sent letters to make me the cause. A clean plan, step by step. If I hadn't caught it, in a few months, when the rainy season came, water would flood my land. And then, they would say, "We warned you." I clenched my fist, not out of anger, but because I finally understood the scale of this. Leonard looked at me, his eyes no longer just observing. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at the pipes, the cuts, the traces they thought time would erase. But they forgot one thing. Land doesn't forget, and neither do I. I'm going to document everything, I said slowly. Everything. Leonard nodded. You should. He walked back to his truck, didn't say anything else. But before getting in, he paused for a second. Daniel, he said, whoever did this isn't an amateur. Invactor. I looked at him. I know, I replied. His truck drove off, leaving me standing alone at the property line. The wind moved lightly. The ground was still, as if nothing had happened. But I knew, beneath that soil was evidence. And on that soil was a mistake. Patricia Vaughn's mistake. She thought I was someone who didn't understand. But she didn't know. I was starting to see the whole picture. And once you see the whole picture, you are no longer the target. You become the one controlling the board. Everything they did would have been perfect if I hadn't reread that document. That night, I didn't go outside. I didn't check the land. I didn't call anyone. I went straight into my father's old office, opened the metal cabinet that had been there for over 20 years, and took out a fireproof box. Inside was something most people have, but very few truly understand. Property documents. I placed the stack of papers on the desk. The yellow light cast down on them, making the printed lines from years ago clear, but also heavy with time. I had read it before. But like most people, I had only read what I needed. This time, I read every line. Slowly, carefully, missing nothing. My father's name, the purchase date, boundary descriptions. Every direction, every distance, every marker defined by stone, trees, and water. I reached the section describing the stream and stopped, not because I had never seen it before, but because this time I understood it. Full ownership of the water flowing through the property, including the right to control its flow, use, and protection from any external interference. I sat still. My heartbeat slowed. I read it again. One more time. The right to control the flow. Not just use. Not just access. Control. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. A strange feeling spread through me. Not surprise, not excitement, but confirmation. Patricia Vaughn thought this was a land dispute. But this wasn't land. This was water. And water is protected by an entirely different set of laws. I remembered what Leonard said. They're changing the flow. I looked back at the words on the page. Protection from any external interference. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Then I laughed. Not loud, not obvious, but enough to break the weight in the air. They didn't know. They truly didn't know. Everything they had done, reshaping the land, installing pipes, sending threatening letters, was based on a false assumption that I only owned land. But I didn't just own land. I owned the water, and that changed everything. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew could confirm this without any doubt. Emily Carter, my cousin, a lawyer, 15 years handling property and environmental disputes. Not someone easily impressed. But if she said something mattered, it mattered. She picked up after 2 rings. Daniel, I need you to look at something, I said. I'm listening. I read the clause, word for word. No edits, No explanations. Just reading. On the other end, silence. Not the kind of silence from confusion. The kind where someone is connecting the pieces. "Are you sure that's the original document?" she asked. "From 1974, I said. "Never changed." Another pause. Then her voice shifted. Sharper. Focused. "Daniel, do you understand what this means?" "I have an idea," I said. "No," she replied. "You don't fully understand it yet." I sat up straight. "Tell me, if they really altered the flow, and if that affects your water source." She paused for a second. "Then this is no longer a standard civil dispute." I said nothing. "Tennessee has specific water laws," she continued. "And with the kind of ownership you have, they're not just trespassing, they're interfering with a specially protected asset." I looked down at the paper. Those old lines now carried a completely different weight. "And if there's evidence?" I asked. "Then they're in serious trouble," she said plainly. "Very serious." Something spread through my chest. Not excitement. Not revenge. Balance. The scale that had been tilted this whole time was starting to return. "What do I do next?" I asked. "Collect everything," she said. "Photos. Measurements. Anything that shows interference. And don't react yet. Let them continue." I frowned. "Why?" "Because every wrong move they make increases the value of this case," she said. "Understand?" I did. "You don't always stop things immediately. Sometimes. You let the other side go further, so they create the evidence against themselves." I stood up, picking up the documents again. What my father left me wasn't just land. It was protection, something Patricia Vaughn couldn't see and didn't understand. "I'll start right away," I said. "Daniel," Emily called out before I hung up. "I'm here. Don't let them know you've read that." I looked out the window. In the distance, Silver Creek Estates was still lit up, peaceful as if nothing had happened. "Too late," I said quietly, "because they already started. They came back at 6:12 in the morning. And this time, they weren't pretending anymore." The chainsaw roared again, sharper, more decisive, no longer testing. This was action. I had been waiting for this moment, not because I wanted it to happen, but because I knew it would. I stepped outside, while the dew still clung to the grass. My breath turned into thin white clouds in the cold air, but inside me, there was no cold left. Calm, very calm. When I reached the property line, 3 workers were already there. One cutting, one dragging branches, one taking notes. And the way they moved told me this wasn't their first time doing this. And Patricia Vaughn was standing there. Same blazer, same clipboard, same cold eyes. As if she were inspecting a project, not destroying someone else's property. 2 more trees were down. 5 in total. I stopped. No shouting, no rushing in. I took out my phone, turned on the camera. My voice came out clear, steady. "Today, 6:12 in the morning, I, Daniel Harper, am recording at the boundary of my property. No permission has been given to the HOA to perform any work here." The chainsaw kept going. I stepped closer, close enough to frame Patricia in the shot. "You are standing on my land," I said, looking straight at her. "I am asking you to stop immediately." Patricia turned. No rush, no tension. Just a look, like she was waiting for me to finish. "We are carrying out work under the authority granted by the latest HOA update," she said. "If you have any concerns, contact our attorney." I stepped forward. "Could you repeat that for the camera?" A second of silence. She looked at my phone, then back at me, and she repeated it, almost word for word. No hesitation, no adjustment. A confidence, almost arrogant. I gave a slight nod. "Thank you." Then I turned away. No further argument. I made the call. "County Sheriff's Office," a voice answered. "I need a unit here immediately," I said. "There are people trespassing and destroying property." I hung up, turned back. They kept working. No one stopped. No one looked at me anymore, as if I didn't exist. That was their second mistake. The first was thinking I didn't understand. The second was thinking I wouldn't act. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Tires grinding on gravel, loud enough to stop everything. The officer stepped out. Middle-aged, calm, taking everything in quickly. "What's going on here?" he asked. I handed him my phone, playing the video. "This is my property," I said. "They have no right to be here." Patricia stepped forward, her voice still even. "We are acting under HOA regulations," she said. "This area falls under management per the latest update." The officer looked between us, not rushing to judgment. "I need to see documentation," he said. I handed him a copy of my property documents. Not the original, but clear enough. He read quickly, gave a small nod, then turned to Patricia. "Do you have documentation showing your authority to perform this work?" Patricia didn't answer right away. She opened her folder, flipped through a few pages, then handed over a document. The officer looked at it. His expression didn't change much, but I saw it. He understood. "This is a civil matter," he said. "But at this time, there is no clear evidence that you have the right to perform work on this portion of land." He turned to the crew. "Stop." A pause. Then the chainsaw shut off. The sound disappeared so quickly it left a ringing in my ears. Patricia stood still. No strong reaction. No argument. Just silence. But I saw something in her eyes shift. Not completely certain anymore. "We will resolve this through legal channels," she said finally. "That's right," I replied. She turned away, walked toward the vehicle parked outside, didn't look back, didn't say another word, leaving behind 5 stumps, 5 empty spaces, and a mistake, fully documented. The officer looked at me. "You should talk to a lawyer," he said. "I already have," I replied. He nodded, then walked away. When everyone was gone, I stood there alone. No machines, no movement, just the wind, and the smell of fresh-cut wood, still in the air. I looked down at the stumps, the exposed rings, each one a year, 50, 60, maybe more, cut down in minutes. I took a deep breath, not to calm down, but to remember. Because from this moment on, this was no longer suspicion, no longer a theory. It was evidence. And Patricia Vaughn had just created it herself. 3 days later, they sent me a letter thicker, heavier, and more dangerous. No longer a warning. This time, it was a formal demand. I opened the envelope at 8 in the evening. Sitting alone in the kitchen. Yellow light. No sound. Just the rustle of paper as I pulled each page out. A law firm logo. Cold language. No emotion. Action. In the interest of the community. Potential damage due to obstruction of water flow. Request for reimbursement. $4,200 for landscape preparation. I read that line and stopped. Not because of the amount, but because of the way it was written. They weren't pretending anymore. They were trying to make me the one at fault. I set the papers down on the table. Looked out the window. Darkness covered the land. But in my mind, everything was clear. They had cut the trees. They had changed the flow. And now, they wanted me to pay for it. A complete plan. If I didn't respond correctly, I would end up responsible for what they had done. I picked up my phone. "Emily," I said when she answered. "I figured they wouldn't stop," she replied. "Worse," I said. "They sent a demand." A short silence. "Send me everything," she said. I took photos of every page and sent them over. 10 minutes later, she called back. "All right," she said. "Now we begin." Not respond, but begin. Her voice shifted. No longer analysis. Action. "We go in 3 directions," she said. At the same time, I leaned back in my chair, listening. "First," she continued, "trespass and property damage. They cut trees on your land. No argument there." I looked outside. 5 stumps still there, like full stops. "Second," she said, "that easement they're relying on. I checked it. I'm guessing it's not valid," I said. "Not just invalid," she replied. "It's completely unenforceable on your property." They never notified you, never got your consent, and they didn't record it properly. I closed my eyes for a second. Another layer just collapsed. Third, she said, her voice slowing, is the most important. I opened my eyes. The water, I said. Exactly, she replied. If we prove they altered the flow and affected your water rights, this is no longer a small civil matter. I said nothing. I understood. This was where everything escalated, from dispute to violation. Daniel, she said, I need you to confirm something. I'm listening. Is there any sign they discharged water from the subdivision onto your land? Not just redirecting flow, but direct discharge. I thought about what Leonard said. The pipes. More than one. If there is, then what? I asked. Then we're not just talking about water rights, she said. We're talking about illegal discharge. The air in the room grew heavier. I stood up, walked to the back door, looked toward the boundary. Darkness covered everything. But I knew exactly where to look. Yes, I said slowly. I think there is. Document it. Record everything, she said. I'll prepare the case. I hung up. No hesitation. I grabbed a flashlight and went straight outside. The wind was colder. The night deeper. But I didn't stop. I reached the first pipe. The light hit it. No water flowing now. But the traces were still there. I kept moving. To the spot Leonard had pointed out. The second pipe. Older. More hidden. I knelt down. Held the light close to the ground. And then I saw it. Not just damp soil. A flow mark. A thin line. Stretching from their side. To mine. Not natural. Directed. I took photos. Recorded video. Every detail. Nothing missed. In that moment, I was no longer the one being targeted. I was collecting evidence. And every piece of evidence pushed them deeper. When I stood up, I looked toward Silver Creek Estates. The lights were still on. The houses still quiet. The people inside might not know what was happening, but they would, soon, because this was no longer just between me and Patricia Vaughn. It had become a case that none of them could control anymore. And Patricia, she had just crossed a line, not a property line, but the line of consequences. A week later, Patricia Vaughn made the first move, but this time, not with a chainsaw. She went after my reputation. The email was sent at 9:15 in the morning, not to me, to my biggest client before I retired, a real estate development company I had stayed in contact with for years. The subject line was simple: concern regarding Daniel Harper. The content was not. She wrote that I was under investigation for environmental violations, that there was a legal dispute involving land and water, that the company should reconsider the relationship. Not a single sentence was completely false, but the whole thing was misleading. That's how people like Patricia operate. They don't fabricate, they distort. I received the forwarded email from the company just an hour later. Daniel, we know this isn't right, but you should be aware. One line, but enough. I read Patricia's email again. Every word, every sentence. She thought I would react, angry, defensive, rushing to explain, but I didn't. I picked up my phone. Emily, I said. I've seen it, she replied immediately. I figured you might have. Not just me, she said. Now we have another issue. Good or bad? I asked. Good, she said. Very good. I paused for a second. Explain. That's defamation, she said plainly, and not a minor one. I leaned back in my chair. She said there's an investigation. There isn't, Emily replied. At least not against you, and she knows that. A brief silence. What does that mean? I asked. It means she just added another charge to herself, she said, and this time, it's personal. I looked out the window. Morning sunlight spread across the land, calm as if nothing had changed. But I knew. Everything was changing fast. Daniel, Emily continued, she's panicking. I frowned. Panicking? People who are in control don't attack randomly, she said. They only do that when they start losing control. I thought about Patricia, the way she stood that morning, The way she spoke. The way she never showed emotion. And now, she sent emails. A mistake. We added to the case, Emily said. And we keep going. We add. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. We keep going. But Patricia wasn't done. That afternoon, a post appeared in the Silver Creek Estates community group. 1,100 members. 1,100 people. The post was from Patricia. A neighboring landowner is intentionally obstructing necessary community maintenance. Unfounded legal accusations. The board remains fully confident in its position. No name, but everyone knew. The post got hundreds of likes within hours. But the important part wasn't the people agreeing. It was the ones who started asking questions. What exactly is the issue? Did they cut trees on private property? Can anyone see the legal documents? Simple question, but dangerous. 40 minutes later, everything was gone. Deleted. No explanation. But the internet doesn't forget. Walter sent me screenshots. She's clearing the path, he wrote. I looked at the deleted questions. Each one, a crack. And Patricia had just tried to cover them. Another mistake. That night, Emily called again. We're almost there, she said. Almost where? The full picture, she replied. I stayed silent. Daniel, she said, her voice slower now. We have trespass. We have altered water flow. We have illegal discharge. We have defamation. And, she paused. And? There are signs of conflict of interest within the HOA board, she said. I sat up straight. Explain. 3 board members voted for the update, while having direct ties to the drainage construction contract, she said. No disclosure. No transparency. A moment of silence. Then I exhaled. Slowly. So, it's not just Patricia. No, Emily said. But she's the most exposed. I stood up. Walked to the back door. Night had fallen. Light wind. The ground still. But I knew, beneath that stillness, a system was collapsing. Not because I broke it, but because they built it wrong. I want to end this, I said. Emily gave a small laugh on the other end. We're not ending it, she said. We're exposing it. I looked toward Silver Creek Estates. The lights were still on, the houses still identical. But inside, doubt had started to spread. And when doubt appears, power begins to shake. Patricia Vaughn thought she was controlling the story. But she didn't realize the story had already changed direction. Like water. And this time, it wasn't flowing her way anymore. 253 people were in that room that night. And it only took 15 minutes for everything to collapse. The Silver Creek Estates Community Center had never been this full. Every chair taken, people standing along the walls, the air thick with anticipation, and something close to anxiety. The rumors had spread. No longer whispers behind fences. Now it was numbers, questions, things Patricia Vaughn could no longer erase from a screen. I sat in the third row. Not in the front. Not in the center. Just an observer. The way they had always seen me. Emily sat beside me. In front of us was a thick file. Nothing flashy, but enough to end everything. Patricia stood at the podium. Same blazer. Same controlled posture. But if you looked closely, you could see it. Her shoulders were tighter. Her eyes moved more. A small crack. In a perfect surface. The meeting began as usual. Approval of minutes. Financial reports. Minor landscaping details. Patricia spoke smoothly. Precisely. Without a stumble. As if nothing had happened. Then she moved to the next item. Legal update regarding the eastern boundary. The room went quiet. This was it. Patricia began speaking. Her voice even. Emotionless. There are currently some unfounded accusations from a neighboring property owner. She didn't finish. Someone stood up. Walter. He didn't raise his hand. Didn't wait. Just stood. Can you state clearly how much this community may have to pay? The question landed in the room, like a stone. Patricia paused. 1 second. 2 seconds. We do not have a specific number at this time, she said. Walter didn't sit down. I do, he said. A few people turned toward him. Public records show over $180,000, not including legal fees and potential penalties. A wave of murmurs spread. Patricia tightened her grip on the podium. That information has not been confirmed. It has been filed in court. Walter cut in. Not loud, but certain. Emily stood up. The room fell silent. I am the attorney representing Daniel Harper, she said. And those numbers are not complete. All eyes turned toward us. Emily stepped forward. No rush, no tension. Just control. We have filed claims for trespass, property damage, interference with water flow, illegal discharge, and defamation, she said. The total damages currently exceed $250,000. A heavy silence followed. Someone exhaled. Someone shook their head. Someone began to understand. Emily continued. And that does not include personal liability for board members who approved these actions while having related interests. That sentence was the final blow. A woman in the front row stood up. I was never informed about this, she said. Another voice. Are we the ones paying for this? Another. Why was the group post deleted? Questions piled up. No more control. Patricia tried to hold it together. Please maintain order. When did you know about this? Another voice cut in. No one waited for an answer anymore. The room broke into noise. Emily stepped back, sat down. Nothing more needed to be said. Everything had already been said. I looked at Patricia. For the first time, she wasn't in control. Not because someone attacked her, but because the truth was no longer hidden. And then, something unexpected happened. An older woman, gray-haired, stood up from the front row. I recognized her. One of the longtime residents. I've been here since the beginning, she said. And I remember that meeting. You called it a minor update, not a change in property rights. The room went quiet. I kept the minutes, she said. And I know this is wrong. 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds. But enough. Patricia looked around. Nothing left to hold on to. Nothing left to say. She lowered her eyes, then spoke. I resign, effective immediately. No explanation, no defense, just the end. She stepped down, walked straight to the door, didn't look back. No one stopped her. No one said a word. The door closed. A small sound, but it echoed. For a long time, 8 weeks later, everything was settled on paper. The HOA agreed to pay $118,000 for damages and restoration, another $34,000 in environmental fines, and over $80,000 to fix the drainage system, a cost that ultimately fell on the residents. Patricia was not protected, not shielded, and she disappeared. No more emails, no more posts, just silence. The following spring, I stood by the water. It was clearer, slower, like it was healing. I sat down, watching the surface reflect the light. My father was right. Some things are not meant to be sold, and some things have to be protected, not with words, but by truly understanding what you actually own. If you have ever dealt with an HOA Karen like this, tell your story. And if you own land, if you have documents, read them. Because sometimes your greatest power has been there all along. You just haven't seen it.